I'm going to take a look at a couple of old tunes that a lot of people know, a lot of folks recognize, and they've kind of entered into the cultural consciousness, if you like. The thing I find interesting about these two songs is that they both make extensive use of chord progressions that basically come straight from the circle of fifths. The circle of fifths is such a valuable tool in the musician's arsenal, and especially in the composer's arsenal. These two songs fit together very well, and in fact, you could make a little medley out of them if you wanted to. So we're going to take a look at, first of all, 5'2", Eyes of Blue, Has Anybody Seen My Gal? So a lot of people call this song 5'2", but it's really called Has Anybody Seen My Gal? And the other song is Ain't She Sweet? So these are two songs about the singer rhapsodizing about his girlfriend or maybe his wife, who knows. We're going to take a look at these two songs. We're going to look at their chord progressions and see how they make extensive use of the circle of fifths. We're looking at the melody of Has Anybody Seen My Gal? In the key of C, and you'll notice right away that it's pretty easy to figure out what chords to use. Right away, those first two notes give you a clue. We're in the key of C, and how do we know? Well, we go to the very last note of the melody. It's C. So that's a pretty good indicator that we are in the key of C. So these two notes are, of course, part of the C major triad. So our first chord is C. But then in measure 2, those two notes are pretty obviously part of the E7 chord. Or just E if you like, but we could also use E7. So immediately we're jumping from C to E7. This takes us out a ways on the circle of fifths, as you can see. So we've started at home on C, and all of a sudden we're over here in the country of E7. And so we've got to work our way back to C. How do we do that? We start going back on the circle of fifths. So E7 can lead us to A7, and that just happens to fit the melody perfectly. And A7 takes us to D7, which also happens to fit the melody, G7, and we're back home on C. And then we have what's known as a turnaround, where we just leap out to A7, which takes us to D minor 7, and takes us to G7. Now, I've had commenters ask, how do you know whether to use a dominant seventh, like A7, or a minor seventh, like A minor 7? Well, the answer is you can use either one. So, for example, we get to that turnaround. You could play it this way. And instead of going to A7, you go to A minor 7. It's just as good. And then instead of going to D minor 7, you could go to D dominant 7. So you see that you have several different options when you reach the turnaround. You could play it with all dominant sevenths, or you could play it with all minor sevenths, or a combination of both. Now, when we go back to the beginning of the song, we're definitely forced to use E7. We can't use E minor 7. That doesn't work. And then A7, we could use A minor 7, but it just doesn't have the same pull towards D7 as A7 does. The dominant seventh chord of course, is a very powerful chord because it makes you want to go to that next chord in the circle of fifths. Now, interestingly enough, when you reach the D7, you could use D minor 7. And we want to use G7 there because that's the natural dominant 7th chord that leads us back to the home chord, C. However, we use D7 because, once again, it's a stronger sound. There's sort of an ineffable quality to these chords, but these dominant 7th chords draw you very powerfully back to the tonic. And then here, you go to A7 and you can use a softer chord, D7 if you like, G7, and now we do the whole thing again. D7, G7, and then here we can just go tonic, subdominant, tonic. And that's the first two lines of the song, which are very much a phrase that repeats with a little bit of a variation at the end, because now, instead of a turnaround so that we can repeat, it ends. But now we're coming up to the B section of the song. This song has what we call an A-A-B-A structure. So we've just taken the A section and we've repeated it with a slight variation at the end, and now we go into the B section. But the interesting thing about the B section in this song is we go right back to that E7 chord. Now, why are we using E7 and not E minor 7? It just doesn't sound right, does it? So a lot of times you determine whether to use a dominant 7th or a minor 7th or even a major 7th. That doesn't work either. E7 just sounds right. And one of the rules that I tell my students is, if it sounds good, it is good. Most of the time, if something sounds good to you when you're figuring out the chords of a song, it's going to sound good to all, well, I should say pretty much all of your listeners. So they're going to hear that E7 and go, yep, that sounds right to me too. And once again, we're going around the circle of fifths. And now we're back to the A section. C, E7, A7. Now, right here, it just lands on C, and that would be the end of the song. However, if you wanted to repeat it, if you were doing a big old sing-along and you just played this as a solo, and now you say, hey, everybody join in, let's sing together. Then you do another turnaround, and you have your choice of doing C, A7, D minor 7, G7, or you can play C, A minor 7, D minor 7, G7. Well, you know all the variations that you can employ there. Whatever you feel like doing at the moment. This is one of the great advantages of playing this style of music, popular music. You can change the chords, and once again, if it sounds good to you, most likely it's going to sound good to your listeners. So, of course, you can play this just playing block chords in the left hand, and it sounds perfectly good. So you want to practice the chords. We can also turn it into a little bit of a ragtime thing, very simple. Using this pattern in the left hand. And then you can play block chords in the turnaround, and so it sounds like this. and so on. So that's Has Anybody Seen My Gal? But now let's take a look at another popular old song, an old sing-along tune that is kind of, to me, that's like the other half of the equation. It just really seems to go together. They're very similar in feel, and they're also very similar as far as the lyrics. We're talking about gals. We're talking about beautiful women that have captured the hearts of the singers of these songs. Now, the interesting thing about a lot of these old tunes, and I didn't do this with the first song, but there's actually a verse before you get to the very famous refrain. They used to call it the refrain. And so Ain't She Sweet has a verse that you very rarely hear. A lot of folks just go right into the Ain't She Sweet part. But there's actually a verse, and that sets the stage for the refrain. Here, I've actually got the lyrics. There she is. There she is. It's an interesting thing that the rhythm of this song is very similar to the other one. There she is, that's what keeps me up at night. And then, excuse me, that is not A7, that's A minor 7. Don't forget that the chord symbols are a little bit different sometimes. You can write AM7 for A minor 7, but you can also just write A with a dash afterward, and that means A minor 7. Oh gee whiz, and then to E7, and then back to A minor 7. So what's happened here in the first four bars, we are clearly in the key of C, but then we make a sudden shift into A minor, the relative minor of C. And then it goes directly back to C. And then, now we've jumped out a little ways on the circle of fifths. But the interesting thing about this particular arrangement is instead of going from A7 to D7, it goes from A7 back to G. And then E minor 7, A minor 7, D7, G7. And so we've gone through the verse, and this now sets the stage for the chorus. Now, this one has a unique chord progression hook, if you like. Instead of going, it could do something very common like that. But you notice that the melody starts on A, but it's a C major chord, so it's really C6. Now, there's two different ways that this is often played. Some people play it this way, going from C to F sharp 9, and then G7. Actually, it would look like this played simply. Or maybe... Now, the way I like to play it is to go from C6 to A flat 7. So, which do you like better? Do you like C6 to F sharp 9 and then G7? You get this chromatic thing here. Or do you like going from C6 to A flat 7 to G7? Either one works, and so really it's a matter of your preference. Which chord progression do you like better? That's one of the interesting things about these old tunes is you can reharmonize them, sometimes in very subtle ways, and it's really a matter of what do you prefer, because these both work. They both sound good. Now, personally, I kind of like the A flat 7. And then notice the phrase repeats. And now if you want to have fun, you can do it both ways. Okay, either way. And then notice here we have, once again, a circle of fifths progression. It's the old leap from C out to E7, go to A7, D7, G7, C. And then that repeats. C, E7, A7, D7, G7, C. Now, the second ending, we go to C7. Well, where's that going to lead us? Obviously to F7. And then it goes back to C, C7. You can play F there or F7. And then we have this little turnaround. And now we're back at the beginning of the refrain. Or whatever you want to do there. You can end on C6 if you want to get fancy. And you can do a similar thing accompany-wise. Might take a little practice there to get that left hand part down. There's no one correct way to do it. It's however you come up with that feels comfortable under your fingers. I like doing it this way because your left hand doesn't have to move too far. And you get this nice bass line. And of course, if you want to make it even fuller, you add some chords in your right hand. Or now, here's where you can have some fun. Let's make a little medley out of these two songs. We can start by playing Has Anybody Seen My Gal? Now, you can do something a little different here. Instead of continuing with this pattern, you can just play a chord on every beat. And then no chord here. You can even do a little Chico Marx thing. Well, maybe not. And then back to the ragtime feel. And then you can do a little turnaround. I'm not used to playing the verse here. Now, if you don't want to play the verse, and I don't blame you because hardly anybody knows the verse, you can just go straight from the end of Has Anybody Seen My Gal right into Ain't She Sweet. Play the refrain. Do a little turnaround. Now, if you really want to get fancy here, you do a little rock and roll bass. Is that rock and roll? It's boogie woogie. I take it back. Once again, I have a hard time playing and talking at the same time, and I get my words mixed up. I really meant to say boogie woogie. And then you can do a big ending. Now, obviously, I'm playing that at full tempo. You might have to slow it down in order to get it under your fingers. Now, obviously, you don't need an audience for that. That's part of your practice routine, practicing something slowly and then gradually speeding up. Have some fun with these two songs. They're very similar in their feel, very similar in the lyric content. They go together very naturally, I think. You can have a fun little medley there. Have a nice sing-along with your friends, and you can ask, has anyone seen my gal? And then, I found her. Ain't she sweet? If you have any questions or comments, you can leave those in the comment section. If there are any other songs that you'd like to see analyzed and played around with in this fashion, let me know. If you'd like to support my work, you can go to my Patreon page. The link is in the description. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and so forth. Thank you to all of you who have recently subscribed to the channel. I appreciate it very much. Thank you for watching. I look forward to speaking to you in the next one.